Auburn ended its 2023 season in disappointing fashion with a bad loss to Maryland in the Music City Bowl. Will Maness joins me as we talk about what Auburn has to look forward to, and is there a quarterback problem on the Plains? That and more on today's episode of The Crowded Booth.
Pile in here and make yourself feel at home. The Crowded Booth is coming on. The Crowded Booth with Bryce Koon.
And we welcome you in to another episode of The Crowded Booth. Bryce Koon alongside Will Maness talking Auburn football. That's how you know that when you see two people here and Ralph's not a part of it, it's because he's running the show in the background because he's just so disgusted with what has happened on the field that, you know, his family, they don't even want to see him talk about
football. He's disgusted with college football in general right now.
Ralph wants a separate Group of 5 league, and we'll let him have a full episode, hour long, for him to be a part of that. But hey, we're talking Auburn football today. Will, you and I were just joking. A month ago, we put up a show entitled, Is Auburn Trending Up? We were excited. This was something like, hey, they're starting to make some strides. And if you have not tuned in during the college football season, I encourage you to go back and watch other shows or lock and get loaded and subscribe to the channel now, because Will has been like this when it comes to Peyton Thorne. I love him. I hate him. I love him. I hate him. I can't take it.
And I think that's accurate.
I think it's a lot of how Auburn fans have felt. So we're going to talk quarterback. We're going to talk Will's frustration at the use of the transfer portal. But first, Will, we got to talk about ending the season on a bad note. It all obviously started in the Iron Bowl. We don't need to relive that. But this game against Maryland,
Iron Bowls, I'll just say this. That other fan base loves to say when Iron Bowls don't matter, they like to cite 2013. They like to cite 2017. But, and now Auburn can say, 2023, that Iron Bowl didn't matter. But it apparently mattered a lot to their band the other night against Michigan. They had to. Part of their routine was to recreate that play. That was, I don't want to hear anything about holding on to kick six ever again, because Auburn's never recreated that with their band. So just putting that out there.
Not salty about it. Well, they end the season on a bad note, a bad loss. And I said in the intro, a bad loss to Maryland. Maryland's a quality football team. Mike Loxley, not a bad head coach by any means. I mean, more in the fashion. I know the weather was terrible in Nashville. I know that you weren't as tuned into it as you were some other games, but you were checking in on it. Just your thoughts coming out of that matchup and some of the frustrations that you had as a fan watching it.
In one word, embarrassing. Auburn did not show up at all to this game. And I don't really know who to pin the blame on other than the head coach, because, it starts and ends with the head coach. And I think that's fair to say of any program for any game. Auburn just getting blasted 31-13 to a Maryland team that is not, what's that, 18 points better than Auburn, 28 points better. I can't do math. Doesn't matter. It was a lot. Maryland is not that much better than Auburn. Their starting quarterback, Talia Tagovailoa, to his little brother, opted out. He's going to go pro. But that didn't matter. And when I saw that happen, I said, it still doesn't matter. And that's usually a bad sign for Auburn. If a backup quarterback plays against Auburn, he looks like a Davey O'Brien Award winner more times than not. And both of Maryland's quarterbacks played well. Maryland, they just dominated the game. They owned the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball. Auburn just did not look prepared in a lot of ways. And coming into the game, I said anybody that would listen to me, I told them, I said, this is not going to be an easy game for Auburn at minimum, and I wouldn't be surprised if Auburn lost when you look at the fact that 3 of Auburn's starters in the secondary were sitting out. And, if you know how good the secondary was the best part of the team, and 3 players opted out. They're going pro: DJ James, Nehemiah Pritchett, and Jalen Simpson. Opted out. They didn't play, and it really hurt Auburn in the secondary. It hurt Auburn with leadership on the field on the defensive side of the ball. Thankfully, Eugene Asante played to keep that linebacker, that front 7 group in order, but it just didn't matter. Auburn just got beat up and down the field, both sides of the ball. And the offense, I mean, that's a whole nother rant about how bad the offense was. And I got a lot to say about the offense. I got a lot to say about the head coach and offensive coordinator relationship. It's bad. It's bad. And we're sitting here January 3rd recording this. And I think I said it after the Iron Bowl. I said, I'm shocked that Philip Montgomery hasn't been fired yet. And to be honest, I'm tired of hearing Hugh Freeze just rant and rave and throw Philip Montgomery under the bus after every anemic offensive performance. Hugh Freeze is an offense guy. And I mean, there's really no excuse for his offense to look that bad. And that just discombobulated. It's one thing to have a plan in place and to get outmatched. Auburn, in more times than once this year, it looked like they didn't really have a plan offensively. So there's a lot of problems in that offensive coaching staff.
A lot of issues, quarterback is obviously one of the big ones. And so I want to ask the question here. I mean, look, we sat there a month ago and said, hey, maybe Peyton Thorne is starting to find, what he needed to find to potentially parlay a second year in this offense under Hugh Freeze. Because look, there's a lot of, I'll be careful because I cover a program that had a guy that did this that won the Heisman. But there's a lot of guys that second year as a transfer, they find a lot of success. Obviously, down here in Baton Rouge, it's Joe Burrow and it's Jaden Daniels. Look, I don't think Peyton Thorne's even in the same conversation as those guys. But
he is not.
But what I will say
at this point,
you mentioned the relationship between offensive coordinator, head coach. I mean, someone has to take the blame here. So I asked, does Auburn have a quarterback problem? Because I feel like you left Nashville saying Thorne, like you have to go get somebody. I mean, Hank Brown's obviously a nice piece. Walker White, I'll get the chance to see him this weekend out in San Antonio, but do you thrust this onto a true freshman? I mean, does Auburn have a quarterback problem and where do they even go to try to figure this out? Or is it an OC head coach? What is the deal? Like, what do you do?
I think the bigger problem is OC head coach, that disconnect. I mean, Hugh Freeze after the game said, well, I wasn't really involved in the offensive game plan because I was recruiting, which, that's fine. I really don't have a problem with that. Auburn had to make up so much ground in recruiting, just getting talent on the roster. They've had to make up so much ground under Hugh Freeze. So I really don't have a problem with him being like, look, I took a backseat on game planning. I wanted to finish out this early period and get guys in the boat, which has kind of been his theme for recruiting, getting guys into the boat. And it worked out. Auburn's got the number 7 recruiting class, which I think we should get into more of that later because I got problems with Auburn's recruiting class as well. How could I have problems with the number 7 recruiting class? But I'll get into it later. I mean, probably the best wide receiver class Auburn's ever had. Hugh Freeze, a big player in that, getting Cam Coleman and Perry Thompson so far. Still working on Ryan Williams, that third 5-star from Saraland, Alabama. We'll sign in February. But the bigger problem is OC to head coach to quarterback. That whole path is so just discombobulated. Going into the Music City Bowl, Hugh Freeze put it out there and said Peyton Thorne is QB1 going into 2024 because I think Hugh Freeze kind of viewed this bowl game as the season opener for 2024. You got so many guys in the secondary sitting out. You're playing young guys out there. That he just kind of viewed this as the start of the 2024 season, this bowl game. And I mean, it was off to a rough start, but so he crowns Peyton Thorne as QB1 for 2024 before this bowl game. And then right after the bowl game, he goes, "Oh, we got a problem at quarterback. This changes everything." I don't know how you can go from one extreme to the other after one game. I don't think that's fair on Peyton Thorne. I don't think it's fair to the offense. There's just a lot of issues going on right now. But you look at who Auburn's got at the quarterback position. Obviously, Peyton Thorne, being his second year, he showed flashes, and there really may be a disconnect with Philip Montgomery and Peyton Thorne and how to best use him because Hugh Freeze has been very public and taking claim of, hey, I was very heavily involved in the game plans against Georgia and Alabama, and it just so happens those are Peyton Thorne's 2 best games. So that tells me Freeze should take over if he wants Peyton Thorne to be the guy. But then he comes out of this bowl game saying, well, he may not be the guy. It's wide open. Hugh Freeze said, direct quote, Ralph doing a great job back there, pulls it up for me. He says, after the game, Freeze said, "It's wide open. I think Hank has something to him for sure." This is really on Hank Brown. The guy threw 42 touchdowns, 1 pick his senior year in high school. there's something to that. He had Hank Brown committed to Liberty. Hank Brown obviously played in Nashville. Tennessee's got really, really good talent, or really competitive high school football talent. He played under Trent Dilfer before Trent Dilfer left to take the UAB job. So he's playing in a tough division, a tough state, playing with, laugh however you want. A Super Bowl winning quarterback was his high school coach. How is this guy only a 3-star? And he showed that against Maryland. He had a really, really good game. Holden Gariner will be back. Got Walker White coming in. So there's obviously some talent behind Peyton Thorne, but there's a disconnect with the staff and with Thorne playing the position. So, obviously Thorne had a lot was to be desired in the wide receiver room this year. This recruiting class is helping a ton with that. Also got transferred from Georgia State, Robert Lewis. I got his name right?
Yep.
Yeah. Will help out a ton. A guy with FBS experience. So that should help elevate. Sam Jackson coming from Cal. He and Peyton Thorne were high school teammates. He played wide receiver. He played wide receiver with Thorne. Thorne's a couple of years older than him. So there's more talent coming in. So that should help Peyton Thorne, but I'm very concerned how he can anoint him QB1 and then after one game be like, oh, well, it's wide open now. And even if reports are to be believed, he went hard after Cam Ward right after the game. And Cam Ward still decided to go to the NFL draft. Now,
which is really telling and weird.
That is telling and weird. He kind of spurned Auburn and Miami both. And then you've got the Liberty quarterback, Caden Salter, former Tennessee transfer. He's now in the portal, played for Freeze at Liberty. A lot of people saying this was the guy Freeze wanted all along. He was just waiting on him to go in the portal. Whatever it may be, you got to get a guy in there and you got to stick with him. You can't say one thing before a game and then go the complete opposite direction after the other. There's problems all over the place. And Freeze has been very open and upfront with the media. Maybe he should curl that back some, because a lot of the stuff he's saying is concerning to me.
Well, it's one of those things. Look, some coaches prefer to keep things close to the vest, not really, they have the coach speak, I should say, not really have a lot out there. Hugh Freeze, from all indications, like you've talked about, and I've talked with a couple of the guys that cover him down there, they say, hey, he's been great with the media. Like, he's been very upfront and forthcoming about what this program needs. But it does tend to feel like he's walking back on those comments. And I do agree with you, Will. Look, one game in the bowl game, per se, should not change the opinion of if Peyton Thorne should be your quarterback or not. The body of the work of the season should change that and not. And so it's very interesting. And look, we can talk recruiting class. Auburn has that 7th ranked recruiting class. They did not bring in, I would say, or a couple weeks ago, we didn't know what they were going to bring in. They bring in a ton of offensive talent. You talked about Cam Coleman, Perry Thompson. The weapons are going to be there. But my question is you have a ton of freshmen that are going to be coming in that are exciting, really lacking in the offensive line category. But, you've been frustrated. You said that this is, it's a frustrating use of the transfer portal for Auburn. So your thoughts on this? You want to be able to build, like we talked yesterday about with, Florida State. Mike Norvell does a good job of it. You still got a ways to go to build through the high school ranks, and I agree, like he's got to build a foundation. But this is just kind of an interesting philosophy. What have you taken away from it?
Yeah, his Freeze recruiting high school recruits, he said more than once he wants to build this team, this roster through high school recruiting. But there's some obvious glaring holes that need to be filled that you can go out and get somebody out of the portal that can step right in right away and fill that hole, mainly on the offensive line. And I've described this recruiting class as being a lot of fluff because it's really propped up by the 5 stars, Cam Coleman, Perry Thompson, both being wide receivers. You've got other 4-star receivers, Malcolm Simmons, Bryce Kane. So you're going to have 4 freshman wide receivers who very may well all start next year as freshmen. And that's how dire the situation is at wide receiver. So Auburn obviously needed an injection of talent there. Their highest rated offensive line commit is DeAndre Carter. Projects to be a guard coming from Mater Dei out in California. Obviously a great high school program out there. A lot of good reports on him. Big kid, 6'3.5", 356 is what he's listed as. So, just kind of a bruiser guard that'll help with the running game. But I mean, there's just some glaring holes, and there's been a number of offensive linemen in the portal that everybody would know. It doesn't take an expert to know that they would walk in and start at Auburn. And Freeze has kind of keyed in on getting those skill players, which is great. Fine. There's another former Auburn coach that did the same thing, and we saw how that ended and how difficult things were for him to be consistent. That was Gus Malzahn. You look at his recruiting classes, they're in the top 10, 15 every year, but it's a lot of skill players. He couldn't get those offensive linemen. He couldn't build the offensive and defensive lines up to a championship level. You got a championship level quarterback, championship level receivers. It doesn't matter if you can't block for them. And that was Gus's main problem, and it's looking like it's going to be Freeze's main problem as well. And then, more into the transfer portal, A.J. Harris, defensive back. He's originally from Phoenix City, right down the road, Phoenix City, Alabama. He's transferring from Georgia. He goes in the portal, and it's like the worst kept secret. It's like, yeah, this kid wants to go to Auburn. And now, sitting here January 3rd, it looks like he's backed off of Auburn. I think, Bryce, you mentioned to me earlier today, he's going to take a visit to LSU. It looks like he's going to take a visit to Penn State. I mean, this would be a big fumbling of a former 5-star cornerback who wanted to come play for you at your school. And it's like they just kind of turned him away, said, no, we're not really interested, which is, if that's what nobody, we probably won't ever know the story, but if that's what it is, and that's kind of what it appears, that's a joke. That's a joke. You're losing 3 NFL corners, and you got a guy that can come in and compete and take a lot of snaps. Keontae Scott says he's going to come out of the nickel where he's been really good and play outside next year. And if you bring in A.J. Harris, you can keep Keontae Scott in that nickel and have one of the top nickels in the SEC and really compete next year, not really skip a beat in your secondary. So, I mean, it's frustrating. It's hard to see, as a fan on the outside, what the plan really is, because, I mean, he goes and takes 2 receivers in the portal, but then signs 4 receivers. Like, I know the whole receiver room need to be rebuilt, but where's the offensive lineman? Where's more defensive linemen? A lot of edge rushers in this class, a handful of linebackers. It was clear probably the 2 biggest needs were wide receiver and pass rush. He seems to have really emphasized going after those 2, through the high school ranks. But offensive line, where you need college offensive linemen, you got to have an offensive lineman to win games and compete. It's like an afterthought. And as a fan that watched the whole Gus Malzahn era and saw that was the really only Achilles heel of those teams, it's frustrating to see this guy come in and kind of be doing the same thing.
Well, you mentioned the A.J. Harris situation. Obviously, some changes on Auburn's staff have come. I mean, could that be due to that? I mean, it's just one of those things where you have talented guys, and look, people are going to have different evaluations. Kids are in the portal for a reason. It doesn't mean that, I would say outside of like the top 10, 15, 20 guys, it's kind of a crapshoot on whether those guys are going to be high impact starters for you. Did that have a lot to do with this? And is that the end of the extent of the coaching changes you think for Auburn and Hugh Freeze?
Well, just for A.J. Harris specifically, I really do think that the change in who's going to be coaching those defensive backs, the cornerbacks, is a big deal. Wes McGriff, who Hugh Freeze brought in for his 3rd stint at Auburn. I mean, this guy's been dynamite. He's a dynamite recruiter. He does really well coaching the secondary. Had a lot of problems off the field with the other defensive coaches. And, we'll probably never know the extent of it, but he lost his on-field role earlier in the season and has kind of just been handling recruiting, doing a great job with visits. Even though he's departing and going to Texas A&M, he should get a lot of credit for this class that Auburn's brought in, this number 7 class so far. He worked really hard, kept doing his job. What he does best, recruiting. And I think with him leaving, that really hurts Auburn's chances with A.J. Harris and maybe turned A.J. Harris off to him. Hugh Freeze brings in Charles Kelly off of Colorado staff to come in and take McGriff's spot. They haven't announced what exactly he'll be coaching yet, but he'll be with Zach Etheridge coaching the secondary. Don't know how they're going to divvy up those duties yet, but Charles Kelly, a guy that Auburn people have wanted to come in and coach on the staff and be the defensive coordinator for a number of years. I mean, people were really pushing for him to get the defensive coordinator job when Hugh Freeze was hired instead of it going to Ron Roberts. But Charles Kelly, he's an Auburn alum. So, you got to think that he'll, really coach for his school, which Auburn has seen a lot of success with. Zach Etheridge, Cadillac Williams, go all the way back, Cody Burns. and on down the line, Auburn's had some really good former players come in and do really well coaching and go on to do bigger things in coaching as well. So, I think the defensive staff, I think, is really solid. And I'll say it again, I'm surprised that I haven't seen more changes to the offensive staff. I was very concerned with Marcus Davis, the receivers coach, another former player, former wide receiver, Marcus Davis. Really concerned with him looking at that receiver group this year and just how bad they were. They were really bad. And a number of those guys were his guys through and through. He recruited all the way through the portal to get them here, and they just really did not turn out. But he's getting a lot of credit for getting Cam Koon and Perry Thompson as well. 24/7 ranks him as the number 4 recruiter in the country. So, Marcus Davis looks like he's going to stick around and be the receivers coach, which I think is good. He probably got to learn a little bit, get a little bit better with his X's and O's part of it, but the recruiting is off to a great start. And, I really think there's got to be a change at offensive coordinator / quarterbacks coach, but still kind of waiting on that.
Yeah. I mean, obviously LSU made the changes this week, so not really, I wouldn't say you're too late in the game. I mean, changes can still happen, especially, the first round of the playoffs just ended, and now we're going to see, the championship game between Washington and Michigan commence, where, I'm not saying for Auburn specifically, but for some schools, maybe their future position coach or coordinator is on some of those staffs that had commitments to coach throughout the tenure of their season.
Well, there was big for Auburn recruiting wise. You mentioned coaches coming and going. Alabama's receivers coach leaving to go to Texas A&M for the same job. That was Ryan Williams' primary recruiter. So kind of got to think Auburn's in the driver's seat to close this thing out with a month to go to get his signature and be the third 5-star receiver in this class, which it would complete the Freeze 5. If you've been following Auburn recruiting, those 5 receivers, that's the Freeze 5 if he can get them. So, I mean, to kind of end on that, I am frustrated, but man, Auburn's getting some really good skill players at the receiver spot. Should help whoever's going to be in that quarterback position, whether it's Peyton Thorne, Hank Brown, or if Walker White comes in and wins the job, which I don't expect. But, Auburn's at least going to be more fun to watch next year.
Yeah, more fun to watch. They just got to have someone deliver the ball to all of these young freshmen they're going to have on the field. But, hey, it's going to be fun to watch, fun to maintain coverage of that all offseason long, and this is the place we'd love to have you, as Will and I will be discussing Auburn pretty often throughout the winter workouts, throughout this portal season in the spring football, and what I'm sure will be just a ton of fun content that you would love to be a part of. So make sure you subscribe to the channel. Thanks for listening or watching wherever you might be doing that, and we will catch you next time here on The Crowded Booth.
Pile in here and make yourself feel at home. The Crowded Booth is coming on. The Crowded Booth with Bryce Koon.